Howdy folks, this is Big Sam. Here on the channel starting in March of 2022, due to the kind of peak interest of the war in Ukraine and the concept of using a Mosin in modern combat, because some of them are being used, unfortunately, still, right as we're speaking, I thought it would be interesting to take a look at some interesting modifications here coming up on the channel that you can make to your Mosin at home. And a caveat here is going to be without permanently modifying your rifle. What do I mean by that? Well, here we have a standard 9130 rifle. You've probably seen a rifle like this, or you maybe own one just like this. This one has a couple interesting modifications to it. It's got a black Archangel stock, as you can see here. It's got the adjustable cheek riser, which is pretty nice. And the buttstock will extend using this roller here. And we got our nice American flag. And of course, this takes detachable 5 or 10 round magazines. It's kind of cool. But what we're talking about today is this rail. Now, in particular, this is an AIM Sport Gen 2 9130 rail. Although, as we're going to see, this is actually backwards compatible. So technically, this is not even necessarily a 9130 because this is actually designed to also work on your M38 carbines or M44 carbines or variants of them. So like the Chinese Type 53, any carbine with that folding bayonet as well, this will work on. This will in fact work on anything with the 9130 or M44 sight base. So the M44 sight base, of course, being this guy right here. This is a Hungarian M44. We could actually put this on the sight base as well. Now, if you wanted to be a real hipster, you could even put this on something weirder, like this 9159 carbine, because of course this is really just a short 9130, so you could put it on this rear sight as well. Now, in future videos, we're going to be looking at some actual shooting testing with this with a scope, which the scope will be coming up here in a future video. But I just wanted to take a little bit of time to talk about this rail, some of its pros and cons, the installation, and, you know, do I think maybe you should give this a try? Now, first of all, what is this? Well, again, this is an AIM Sport, 2 words, AIMS Sport Gen 2 rail, and we're going to see why the Gen 2 rail is a lot better than the Gen 1 here once we disassemble this. But as we can see, it's just sort of like this bolt-on design that goes on and replaces your rear sight. There are no permanent modifications necessary to this rifle. So here we've got our Picatinny rail. We'll look more at the hardware here in a second, but I could mount a scope on here or a red dot or really anything I wanted to. Now these are mainly designed for scout scopes. Now a scout scope is, again, something we're going to look at here in another video coming up, but the idea is it's a long eye relief because your eye is going to be like back here, so there's going to be a huge distance between your eye and the actual scope itself. So you have to have a scope that has a little bit different eye relief because your eye is not going to be right up next to the scope like a PU where the scope is like all the way back here. The scope's going to be like up here on something with a rail like this. So this will not work with your kind of standard scope, short eye relief as we'd call it. You got to have a special scope for this. But you can still get one of those for a relatively good price and they're still fine. Right? This is sort of hearkening to Jeff Cooper's idea of like a scout rifle, like the Steyr Scout. That kind, I think. I don't know if that was a long eye relief or not. Actually, you'll have to post in the comments if anyone owns a Steyr Scout. I certainly don't think Jeff Cooper would have wanted a Mosin though. I guess we'll never know. Anyway, apart from that, this guy is still really interesting. So, again, this guy is what we would call no permanent modifications required. So this might look like we have these horrible modifications done to this rifle. We've got a crazy stock, we got a top and bottom rail with a vertical foregrip and a deployable bipod and a top rail. But if I wanted to, I could very easily convert this rifle back to its original form and make it again look just like this with our wood stock and put the rear sight back on very easily. So that's one of the attractions here. Now, another reason you might like this is, now some of us are getting older and up there in years, and some of us just have vision impairments, but some of us, regardless of the case, have a harder time seeing than some others. Some of us just, God blessed us with better eyesight. I wasn't really one of those. In fact, I actually, on 9130s, I kind of have a hard time seeing the sights. I don't really like the sights too well on 9130 rifles. I much prefer the older style M91 rear sights, but that's a story for another day. But regardless of the case, if you have issues with, kind of seeing your target, regardless if maybe you just don't like the sight picture, or maybe you have vision impairment issues, this may be a good solution because, again, you can put a scope on here with magnification, and if you want to, you can remove this and go back to the original configuration when you're done shooting, and you want to just put this back up for display or however you want to do it. So there's a lot of allure to this no permanent modification scope mounting system. But as we're going to see is when we disassemble this and then reassemble this, not all of these scope mounts are created equal. Okay, now this is actually really easy to install. Now some of y'all might be saying, well, Big Sam, I don't have a lot of experience with these tools or, building guns or modifying guns, and I just don't know if I could do something like this. To that I say, is an expression my grandpa always used to use, horse feathers. Of course you can, and I'll show you how easy it is. So let's go ahead and I'm going to remove this, and then I'm going to show you then how to install this and some of the pros and cons of this sight. So let's take a look at that now. Alrighty, so as you can see, we have no rear sight mounted. We just have our sight base on here. So the rear sight assembly is gone entirely. Now, what's supposed to be here is two things. You're supposed to have a spring, or as we say in Arkansas, sprang. The spring actually goes up under here, and it's going to apply tension from the bottom going up on the actual rear sight, which has a pin going through here, which is what secures it. So that's been removed, and it's pretty easy to remove that. You just punch this out, and then you pull out the punch, and then it's going to launch your sight. The spring is going to launch your sight into the next county, and then you should be able to pull the spring out. Now, sometimes the tricky thing is that spring can actually be soldered on here. So if it is soldered, you will need to then figure out a way to remove that. You can heat it up, but I haven't had to deal with that. This guy was made in 1941, and it is not soldered. So maybe some of the early ones were soldered, or the later ones. It's kind of hard to say for certain. I'm still trying to figure out which ones, or if you can tell which ones were soldered or not. But we looked out on this one. Now this one, y'all might remember, is David Chipman, one of the Moldy Leprosy Mosins, and he has seen better days. Look at that. That looks horrible. But he still has a pretty decent bore, which is why we got him in an Archangel stock. So he's an interesting test case for some of these cool and novel Mosin part updates. Okay, so let's go ahead and get our sight on here. Now I want to show you, this is going to get interesting. Remember I said this is a Gen 2, and I also said that not all of these rails are created equal. Here's why. You don't want a Gen 1 of these. When you buy a rail like this, you want to make sure what type it is. So some of these rails, as you can see here, it's going to sit on here, and then you're actually going to secure it via these two screws. Okay, so you're going to have a screw here on each side, as you can see right here. Get my camera to, whoa, sorry to blind you. This is threaded in here, right? So this is going to thread in there. So it's really simple. We're just going to put a screw here and then one on the back. So we have these two screws here for that. Okay, now the Gen 1 and the original design of this, basically this is how it worked. It worked like a seesaw. Now, how does a seesaw work in a Mosin application? Well, it's really simple, right? If I install these screws, it would then be able to kind of pivot on here, right? So, well then how do I make this not pivot anymore? The way the Gen 1s worked, they would use 2 set screws. So they would have a screw on one end and a screw on the other end. There'd be 2 holes. There's 1 hole here, but there'd be a hole here and a hole here that would be threaded. And then the screw would go down here and it would touch the end of the barrel here and here. Now, why it wouldn't thread into the barrel, it would just touch it. And the idea is that you've got a seesaw, but it can't go this way because the screw down here would be hitting the barrel, and it couldn't go this way because the screw over here would be hitting the barrel. So kind of not a good design. This is not the type of design that you want. And somebody who's smarter than me actually figured out a better approach to this, which is what this Gen 2 rail uses. So when you buy a rail, you want to make sure it's not that seesaw type. You want to make sure it's this type, that it has something like this. Okay, see this guy right here? This is an extra little part that comes with this guy. And as we would say down in Mexico, this is mucho importante. Now, what does this do? Well, remember, somebody who's smarter than me figured out that there's a little, so it's kind of hard to see, there's a little gap, like a little cave under here. And the way the rear, let me get my camera to focus here. The way the rear spring works for the rear sight is it actually goes under here. And that's how it's actually retained, is it sits under here. It goes right back into about there. So you take this piece, you slide them in like that. Look at that. Now this piece, you can see right here plainly, is threaded. So this is now retained, and it gives you something to thread and secure your mount into. This is a much better design. This is still not the greatest design ever made, but this is miles better than the seesaw with 2 set screws. This is what you want if you're going to look for a rail like this. So make sure that if you're buying a rail, that it uses a system like this that sits up under here, under the rear sight base, and actually has something to thread into. So the AIM Sport Gen 2 rail has that. Okay, so how do we get this installed now? Well, we're going to take our rail, and remember, we're going to, this is going to be hard to do on camera. First of all, take our 2 screws, because we want to make this, okay. And you see how easy it is, because I'm not even looking at it, I'm looking through a camera, and I'm able to do this. So it's pretty easy, and I'm just hand threading that in for now. We'll tighten that later. Now, if you actually want to go get good groupings, you're going to want to Loctite these. So get some blue Loctite and put it on these guys. But I'm just demonstrating how to install this, so I'm not going to put Loctite on this for now. Okay, now this is still going to move up and down, as you can see, but I'm just going to get these guys hand tight, and we'll tighten these later. Okay, so see that? Yeah, that's kind of how this works. Okay, so now we got our seesaw, but we don't have the set screws. There is 1 set screw, but it's not for the what you're thinking. We'll look at that here in a second. So for the installation, you actually are going to need you're going to need 2 of these here Allen keys, Allen wrenches. I'm not sure what you call it in your country. We generally here in the United States call these Allen wrenches. Okay, so you're going to have a little Allen wrench and a big Allen wrench. And I think this is a size 2.5, which I think is metric. This is probably like a 4. So this guy you're going to use to tighten these. Again, I'm not going to tighten these yet. And then you're going to have the main screw up here, which is going to be for this guy. Okay, Now this is an important screw because this is what's going to thread into that little hole there. See that? Oh yeah. Okay. Now there's one other screw here you might notice that. So this is the main screw. This is another screw. This is our one set screw we have. This is actually not going to thread into anything. What is this for? You ask good questions. So this is to secure the mount. But remember, when I tighten this, how do we actually make sure this is parallel to the bore, right? Because what we don't want is for it to be at like this angle. And so you might have to move your reticle way up or way down depending on how this is angled in order to get it sighted in for what you're looking at. So this set screw is actually to adjust the elevation and tilt of this whole thing. So it's slightly ghetto, but it works, as you'll find out. So what you want to do is tighten this. So first of all, we're going to try to tighten. This screw can be a little hard to start sometimes. And I'm actually going to back this set screw out a little bit. So I'm going to move this up here. And I'm going to back this set screw out so we can actually, get this guy started. And that's the important thing. You want to be able to get this main guy started. Okay. See, he doesn't quite want to go in. So this guy is a little fun, and sometimes you have to kind of play around with this a little bit. We have to hold it at the right angle is the problem. Okay, yeah, so you just kind of have to make it sure you hold it at the correct angle. Because see, now what's happening is now I'm tightening it, and now it kind of wants to go like that. So the set screws kind of offset it. But yeah, it's a little ghetto, but it works. Okay. So you can see now that let me see if I can zoom in. So right here, now the rear sight base is actually hitting that little insert there. So now if we want to, I can back this guy out some. Now I can tighten this set screw. And really, technically the correct way to do this would be to have some sort of laser where you can say, okay, now it's really lifting it. But some way to measure to make sure this is parallel to the bore, but I'm just doing this for a demonstration of how to install, and I'm too hillbilly to really do anything fancy like that. Okay, so now I'm able to tighten this. Okay, and now as you can see, as I tighten this, there's a gap there. So now it's more pointed this direction. Okay, but as you can see, that's actually really simple. I actually made that look more complicated than it is, but this is really good. So I'm going to just tighten these guys a little bit here. All right. Remember, all of these you really should Loctite if you're planning on actually trying to get good groups. All right, so let's see how sturdy this is. Remember, this isn't even like super tight. I could tighten this more and I could Loctite this, but let's just see how tight this is. Yeah, that is not moving anywhere. This is a much better design than the set screw, the seesaw pattern. I'll call it the seesaw pattern. That one, you really could get it to move. This one will not move, kind of. There's one way I can get this to move, and this actually has to do with the cost of this actual rail. How much did this rail cost? I want to say I paid like $25 for this whole thing. Just very, very cheap, okay? Now, as a byproduct of that, what you might ask, well, what is this rail actually made out of? And that's a really good question. Have y'all ever seen Superman where, they'll see him coming and someone will say, it's a bird, it's a plane, it's Superman. Okay, you probably know what I'm talking about. Now, how does that relate to this? kind of the same thing. You might look at this and say, it's plastic, it's metal, it's Chinesium. Now this is what we call Chinesium here in the States, where it's sort of this weird hybrid, and it's somewhere in between a plastic and a metal. Case in point, let me try to, I'm going to try to squeeze it in on this side, because remember here, and there's nothing. But right here, where I get the most leverage, and this is most likely to bend, you can see it moving, but you can see it's really only moving right here. I think this, what would we call this in physics class? The fulcrum? I don't know. I didn't take physics in college, so I avoided that like the plague. But I guess the fulcrum, we can see over here, it's fine. But over here, this is going to bend a little bit. See that? Okay, so this is what happens when you pay $25 for a whole rail assembly. It's not the greatest thing in the world, but back here is really where it counts. I mean, up here is so far up. I mean, even with a steel one, you don't really want to mount anything with just this hanging, because yeah, you're more liable to get like vibrations and other stuff. So your best bet is to mount back here, which is also good because it's going to be closer to your eye. So you really only want to use this section of the rail. That's just sort of the way it is. You could probably still get away with like mounting a red dot or something all the way up here if you wanted to. But if you're going to mount a scope, this is really your workable section over here. You don't really want to have a bunch hanging out on this side. Otherwise, when you fire this gun, this is probably going to have a lot of vibration if you looked at this on high-speed camera. Okay, so that's what happens when you pay $25 for a rail. Now, there's all sorts of rails out there. There's tons of different people. There's also the tri-rail. You might have seen that. And I believe the tri-rail uses the similar system as this, which is pretty cool. But honestly, for 25 bucks, you know, we're going to get a scope on this, a scout scope, and we're going to go try David Chipman out with a scope on this mount. But this seems like a decent price for what you get. It seems like this is going to work fairly well. And remember, this is going to be pretty easy to convert back into our standard configuration. So theoretically, this is a win-win. So how many, looks like we get 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14. We get 15. I don't even know what you call that. I'm not a very tactical person, so Picatinny's new to me. But 15 mounting points, rails, I don't know what you call that. But honestly, pretty good. I just think this is really cost effective for everything you get. And remember, this is the Gen 2. This is going to be way better than that old Gen 1. So for 25 bucks, I mean, honestly, this is a no-brainer. I mean, I don't know why you wouldn't buy one of these if you had like a scout scope or something cool to put on here. So this is pretty cool. Now, you don't actually even have to mount a scope on here. You could mount some other things if you really wanted to. Here is a really cheap Chinese NC Star red dot, and it's got I think this is is that an IR laser? It's got 2 separate lasers on it. I mean, if this isn't tactical, I don't know what is. So, you know, this is another option as well. So thanks for watching, guys. I hope you enjoyed taking a look at this really clever and interesting, and most importantly, cost-effective rail system for the Mosin Nagant. And I'll try to put some links in the description of where you can go buy one of these if you're interested, if I'm able to find some. If not, just shoot me an email if you're looking for something like this, or you'd like my personal take on what rail might be best for you, depending on what your budget and situation is, or rifle is, and what exactly you're looking for. So that's pretty cool. So hopefully this installation video was helpful. Now, one other thing I want to mention here, and one thing I didn't quite get to, I alluded before that this should work on your carbines. Now, the carbines have a shorter sight base, and you'll notice here that this guy actually has two of these recesses right here. So remember, we use this one, but he has another one. Well, this one is actually for the carbene variants. So on the carbene variants, it's shorter. So there's less space between the end and the pivot point here. So that's when you would use this space. So I think that's another good example of highlighting why this is such a good all-purpose universal rail system for not a lot of money. It's going to work on your carbines and rifles and whatever you got that uses either the standard 9130 or M44 sight bases. So I hope y'all enjoyed taking a look at this, and I hope this was helpful. If you got any more questions, never hesitate to email me. I always put my email in the description of every video, and I love hearing from y'all. So again, thanks for watching. If you like more Mosin Nagant content like this, please consider subscribing and hitting the bell so you always get notified when we upload a new Mosin video. Let me know if y'all have any prayer requests, and we'll see you next time.